This is your story.
Have you ever caught yourself asking, why am I so lazy? Or maybe you've wondered, why don't I take responsibility? Why can't I focus? Why do I struggle to set goals and follow through? If you've been asking yourself these kinds of questions often, I want you to pause for a moment, okay? Because underneath these questions lies a harsh self-judgment. You're not just looking for answers. You're blaming yourself. But maybe the real issue isn't that you're lazy or lack willpower. Maybe what's actually driving these behaviors is something rooted in your biology, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. Now, you might be thinking, wait, I just said I'm lazy, and you're telling me this is about hyperactivity. How does that make sense? That's exactly where we need to clear up a common misunderstanding, okay? When people hear the word hyperactivity, they often imagine energetic kids, students who can't sit still in class. But attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is not something limited to childhood. And in adults, it often looks completely different. This condition is related to an imbalance in certain neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine and norepinephrine, right? It often affects the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive functions like planning, focus, and decision-making. And here's the key. This isn't a flaw in your character. This is about how your brain functions. And once you understand how your brain works, you can begin to build strategies around it. Remember this, the problem isn't you, it's the system. And once you understand that system, you can change it, okay? Attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is most commonly associated with childhood. But scientific research shows that the effects of this condition are far from limited to early life. It's actually quite prevalent in adulthood as well. What's more, in some individuals, the symptoms present in a much quieter form. They often go unnoticed for years, mistaken for personality traits rather than signs of a neurobiological condition. So, what makes attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder different in adulthood? Most adults don't describe it the same way children do. Instead, they ask themselves questions like, why can't I focus? Why can't I start or finish anything? Why do I leave everything to the last minute? And most of the time, these struggles are labeled as laziness or a lack of motivation. But what's actually happening is far more biological and systemic, a dysfunction in dopamine regulation. In some individuals, these patterns also impact social dynamics. A person may appear to be listening, but their mind has already drifted elsewhere. In other cases, impulsive interruptions happen due to restlessness. But here's the key insight. Many of these individuals are highly creative, full of potential, and capable of visionary thinking. And yet, difficulties with internal organization prevent that potential from becoming consistent performance. Dr. Gaborme describes this perfectly. Attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is not a deficit of attention. It is a problem with regulating attention. The mind doesn't focus on one thing. It focuses on everything at once. That description captures the adult experience of this condition more accurately than any clinical definition. This isn't about weakness of character. It's about how the brain is wired. And here's the good news. Once you recognize the difference, meaningful change becomes possible with the right support. My goal with this video isn't just to share information. It's to help you put together the pieces of yourself that maybe you've been noticing for years, but never had a name for.
Don't forget to subscribe.
And maybe, just maybe, to help you open the door to making peace with yourself. For the first time, with guidance from the right professionals, scientific data clearly shows that attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder often begins in childhood but can persist well into adulthood, and yet it's frequently overlooked. Why? Because the symptoms tend to change shape as you grow older, okay? The hyperactivity you may have seen in childhood, the physical restlessness, the constant movement often decreases over time. Instead, it transforms into a more internal form of agitation, a kind of mental restlessness. That shift makes it much harder to recognize. According to the American Psychiatric Association, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is classified as a neurodevelopmental disorder that starts in childhood. But even that term, disorder, doesn't fully capture what's happening. Because individuals with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder often show an extraordinary ability to focus when they're genuinely interested or passionate about a subject. This phenomenon is called hyperfocus, okay? It means the issue isn't a lack of attention. It's a difference in how attention is regulated. The brain ignores what feels mundane or irrelevant but it can lock in with laser-sharp precision when something feels meaningful or exciting. Let's go a bit deeper into the technical side. There are three primary subtypes of attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, the predominantly inattentive type. This subtype involves symptoms like forgetfulness, mental drifting, and difficulty organizing tasks. Hyperactivity is minimal or even completely absent, the predominantly hyperactive impulsive type. These individuals often show signs of restlessness, impatience, frequent interruptions, or impulsive reactions. Attention difficulties are less prominent. The combined type, this is when both attention deficits and hyperactive impulsive behaviors are clearly present. These individuals experience challenges in staying focused, as well as noticeable behavioral agitation. And here's something important. Not every individual with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is hyperactive. In fact, many adults with this condition appear calm and composed from the outside, but inside, there's a storm thoughts race. The mind jumps from one task to another. It's hard to maintain focus. And yet, when deeply engaged, you might even forget that time exists. This neurological wiring can actually bring a lot of strengths: creativity, rapid thinking, a hunger for novelty. But without regulation, that same wiring can lead to burnout and a crushing sense of underachievement, right? And once you truly understand that, it can change the way you see yourself. Maybe for years you've labeled yourself as lazy, irresponsible, or scattered. But what if behind all of that, there's a biological, structural, and entirely manageable difference? So what are the signs that might make you question whether what you're experiencing is actually attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder in adulthood? When should you start thinking this isn't just being a little disorganized? Start with this. Do you have a hard time getting started on tasks, especially when the task is boring, uninteresting, or requires sustained attention? You sit down, everything's ready, but for some reason, you just can't begin. You feel this invisible resistance inside, like something's holding you back. That's not just a lack of motivation, that's a breakdown in executive function. On a neuroscientific level, this difficulty is linked to the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain responsible for planning, initiating, maintaining, and completing tasks. In individuals with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, this system either takes longer to activate or quickly burns out. Here's how it plays out for many people. They begin one task, get bored, and then switch to another, and then another. Before they know it, they've started a dozen things, but haven't finished a single one. Mentally, it feels like you're always doing something. But by the end of the day, nothing's actually done. And this isn't just a functional issue. It's emotionally draining because you start labeling yourself disorganized, lazy, incapable. But here's the truth. This isn't about your personality. It's a neurological pattern. The brain's reward system only kicks in when there's enough stimulation or when the task falls within your zone of interest. When something feels boring or irrelevant, dopamine levels drop. That drop disrupts both motivation and follow-through. The question you need to ask yourself is this: am I really lazy, or is my brain simply not getting enough stimulation to engage with this task? That distinction matters because laziness carries a moral judgment. But attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is a neurobiological difference. And once you see that clearly, it becomes something you can manage. As Professor Edward Hallowell puts it, people with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder are like Ferrari engines with bicycle brakes. If given the right support and direction, they can reach extraordinary heights. Have you ever had one of those moments where something grabs your interest, you sit down to focus on it, and hours pass without you even realizing? You can't remember the last time you ate or drank water. Someone might have called your name multiple times, and you didn't hear a thing. It's like the whole world just faded into the background. That's what we call hyperfocus, okay? And interestingly, it's something that often shows up in people with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. At first glance, it might seem like a contradiction. We call it attention deficit, but here's someone showing an incredible amount of attention. So how does that make sense? The key lies in understanding that attention deficit in this context doesn't mean you can't pay attention. It means you struggle to direct your attention where it needs to go. The attention system is inconsistent. When something sparks your interest, especially if there's a sense of reward involved, your brain boosts dopamine production, and that causes you to lock in. From a scientific standpoint, this is a form of hyperfocus, okay? On a neurological level, the anterior cingulate cortex and the mesolimbic dopamine pathway become highly activated. Your brain interprets this moment as this is important, and it temporarily shuts out everything else. That's why when you're gaming or designing something, you might not hear people calling you. Sometimes you won't even notice someone walking up to you. The brain's attention filter has essentially muted the outside world. Now, this ability can be an advantage, but when it goes unmanaged, it can disrupt time management and daily functioning. So this isn't successful focus. It's one extreme end of an attention regulation issue. Here's the takeaway. Attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder isn't about a lack of attention. It's about difficulty managing attention. If something draws you in, you hyperfocus, right? But if it doesn't, even the simplest task can feel impossible. Have you ever found yourself thinking, I don't know what to do today, and then spent hours in front of a screen doing unimportant things, never actually starting the task that really matters? Maybe you even tried to make a to-do list, but either couldn't start it or never followed through with what you wrote down. This isn't just poor planning. This is a challenge with executive function, and it's something that shows up frequently in people with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. People with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder often find themselves running late to appointments, procrastinating until the last minute, or losing track of time completely. Hours can slip away without them realizing it, and then there's forgetfulness. Another hallmark of this condition: wallet, keys, phone, glasses, umbrella. It feels like everything is constantly in lost mode. But it doesn't stop with objects. Appointments, to-do lists, even promises made to others can easily be forgotten. That's because working memory, your ability to hold short-term information in mind, is often impaired. Now, let's talk about listening. Listening isn't just about hearing. It's a mental process that requires tracking words, staying focused, and following a narrative in real time. And for someone with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, this can be incredibly difficult, especially when the topic isn't particularly engaging. The mind drifts, thoughts get pulled elsewhere. The brain stops following what's being said and starts following its own internal dialogue. The person might begin to daydream without even realizing it. And the result? They may give a response that's unrelated to the conversation, interrupt without meaning to, or suddenly shift the topic, leaving the other person confused. But this isn't rudeness. It's a cognitive attention escape, because to the brain wired this way, focusing on uninteresting information feels like wasting energy. So it looks for a more stimulating track to follow, and that track often leads inward. One of the most common symptoms in adults with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is impulsivity. So, what exactly is impulsivity? Put simply, it's the brain's inability to hit the brakes. A thought or urge appears. The brain reacts instantly, and action is taken without thinking through the consequences.
Don't forget to subscribe.
And this is where the control power of the prefrontal cortex comes into question. Impulsivity is essentially a weakening of the brain's behavioral control system. In other words, the pause and think part of the decision-making process gets bypassed. The brain moves straight from impulse to action. Functional MRI studies show that in impulsive individuals, there's reduced activity in brain regions such as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the orbitofrontal cortex. These areas are crucial for weighing long-term outcomes. When their activity is low, the brain prioritizes short-term gratification and ignores the long-term consequences. Okay? So, what does this look like in real life? A constant sense of impatience, difficulty waiting in lines, trouble sitting still at a red light, interrupting others while they're speaking or giving rushed answers, a mental voice that says, now, immediately do it. People with high impulsivity often make quick decisions they later regret, not because they're careless, but because their brain's regulatory system responds too fast. They might jump into new jobs or projects without thinking them through. They may rush into risky relationships. They often spend money without planning, and they live in a cycle of, I wish I had thought this through. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't just a behavioral issue. It's a misfiring of the nervous system's internal prioritization process. Impulsive actions are often triggered by the dominance of the limbic system, especially the amygdala, which processes emotional intensity. That means emotion takes over before rational thought has a chance to weigh in. As a result, behavior becomes more guided by feeling than logic. And here's something else to notice. Impulsivity is often accompanied by anxiety and a general state of inner panic. The mind wants to act immediately, but it isn't fully prepared to face the consequences of that action. This creates a sense of inner restlessness, a constant state of being on edge. Finally, impulsivity tends to bring along another companion. That's why people with high impulsivity often experience clumsiness, minor accidents, or repeated small mistakes. Their mind has already moved on to the next step. It hasn't fully settled into the present moment. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where something slips out of your mouth before the sentence is even finished, and then comes the silence, the look on the other person's face, and that sinking thought, I wish I'd waited just a second. That's the moment where the mind speeds up exactly when it's supposed to slow down. This isn't just about being blunt or tactless. It's a cognitive reflex triggered by a weakened impulse control system. Impulsivity isn't just physical. It shows up verbally too. That means saying the thought without filtering it first. This is where the concept of inhibition comes into play. Inhibition is your brain's internal voice that says, not now. Don't say that yet. But in individuals with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, especially when the prefrontal cortex isn't active enough, this filtering system breaks down the result. A sentence is spoken without thinking. A joke lands the wrong way. A comment comes off as too sharp, and what's left behind is the lingering thought, that's not what I meant. And what does that lead to? Misunderstandings in social settings, emotional tension in close relationships, a loss of credibility in professional environments, and most significantly, guilt. Because here's the thing, these individuals are often deeply empathetic and emotionally sensitive. But when the reaction speed outpaces their thinking speed, they can unintentionally hurt others. With awareness, emotional regulation techniques, and professional support when needed, those impulsive outbursts can give way to a more balanced, responsive nervous system. In childhood, individuals with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder are often seen as energetic, restless, and impatient. But when this condition carries into adulthood, it undergoes a dramatic transformation. The outward signs of hyperactivity begin to fade, sometimes they even disappear entirely, but what's happening beneath the surface is far more complex. Because physical restlessness is replaced by mental agitation. You may feel constantly tense, unable to relax. The moment you're left with nothing to do, a sense of unease creeps in. Your mind becomes a stage where thoughts endlessly swirl, ideas form, and scenarios play out. Staying present becomes difficult. And this isn't just simple distraction. It often leads to difficulty managing stress, anger, and intense emotions. This ongoing state of brain arousal is connected to irregular activity of neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine, the very chemicals that help regulate attention and impulse control. When they're out of balance, your brain can't effectively send the stop signal. The chain of thought never breaks. Dr. Russell Barkley of Harvard University explains the adult impact of attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder this way. People with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder don't struggle with regulating thoughts and emotions. They struggle to start and stop them. It's not just about attention. It's about the timing of behavior. All of these symptoms don't just affect how you relate to others. They impact how you relate to yourself because you start to wonder, why am I all over the place? Why can't I just be more organized? What's wrong with me? This internal dialogue, filled with blame and shame, slowly eats away at your self-esteem. Over time, it can lead to guilt, hopelessness, and depressive states. And when it's left unrecognized and unsupported, it leads to a lifelong feeling of being not enough, of always falling short, of being fundamentally flawed. That's why, instead of just trying to cope with these symptoms, it's essential to understand where they come from and when needed to seek guidance from a trained professional. Because awareness brings understanding, and understanding makes change possible. In daily life, all of us struggle to focus from time to time. Especially during stressful periods, our minds can feel scattered. It becomes harder to plan, to prioritize, and to maintain a sense of structure. That's entirely human. But here's what really matters: how often and how intensely these symptoms are showing up in your life. If these challenges have been present for more than 6 months, and during that time, your work life, academic performance, relationships, or overall quality of life have been consistently affected, then it's time to consider that this may be more than just stress. It could be the sign of a neurodevelopmental difference. Remember this: not being able to fix something on your own doesn't mean you're weak. It simply means you need the right tools and the right guidance. And seeking support is not a weakness. It's a sign of maturity and self-awareness. The attention system in your brain can be retrained because attention, much like a muscle, grows with the right kind of training. Today, there are many tools and apps designed specifically to improve visual attention, auditory focus, working memory, and sustained concentration. And as research has shown, these kinds of cognitive exercises play a significant role in enhancing the functionality of the prefrontal cortex. Even something as simple as a focus-based brain game can strengthen the very systems in your brain that govern decision-making and planning. In addition to that, breathing exercises and mindfulness techniques are incredibly powerful tools for regulating attention and calming mental clutter. Mindfulness is not just a relaxation method. It's a scientifically supported practice that has direct effects on the brain's attention and emotional regulation centers. According to studies published by the American Psychological Association, regular mindfulness practice has been shown to improve focus and reduce impulsivity. If you're someone who's interested in personal development and psychology, then you're in the right place. On this channel, I share scientifically grounded content that's designed to actually help you. If this video was helpful for you, don't forget to subscribe. And if you turn on notifications, you'll always be the first to know when a new video drops. Because here, we don't just learn, we evolve together. And always remember, transformation begins with awareness.